All right, hi there. My name is Lars Kellogg-Stedman. I work at Red Hat. Until recently, I was working with our OpenStack team. Boy, that projector is bright. In January this year, I joined the academic partnership program between Red Hat and Boston University, and since then I've been working pretty much full-time with the folks at the Massachusetts Open Cloud on their OpenStack deployments. So the MOC was put together 4 years ago originally, and there were some constraints at the time. OpenStack itself wasn't very mature then, and the tools for installing it weren't as developed either. At the same time, they had to beg and borrow, probably not steal, hardware to get the environment up and running. You stole some. Excellent. So it wasn't anybody's idea of a best practice installation, and the mix of hardware made it difficult to use some of the existing installation tools. The installation was driven by a set of Puppet modules that were descended from Red Hat's Astapor project, which I think was an upstream name for a previous incarnation of the Red Hat installer. And then those modules were modified locally to implement the configuration that the MOC wanted. So that was actually very successful. At a time when a lot of people's OpenStack deployments were failing, the MOC had a running environment that people were using. Since then, it's been used by hundreds of users, both in academic coursework and for research projects. Because of some of those constraints that were imposed on the original build, there were a few limitations in the first environment. There was no high availability at the controllers or at the network plane, which meant that it was fragile in the face of certain kinds of failures. It was difficult to introduce new features and new services into the environment. Because of the use of the locally customized Puppet modules, it meant that trying to bring in new work from upstream often meant a lot of manual reimplementation work. For the same reason it was difficult to upgrade, that would have been a complete replacement of the entire configuration environment, which would have been a great deal of manual effort. And it was difficult to get support for it from Red Hat, because while it was all running supported software, the configuration was highly specific to the MOC. So any support staff who were trying to help address issues there needed to first become familiar with the MOC configuration. At the same time, over that period, there were also increased pressures on the environment. More and more people were interested in using the MOC for research or coursework, and people were looking for larger resource allocation, so more memory, more storage, and things like that. In the spring of this year, the MOC received a large hardware donation from 2 Sigma. About 100 servers with multi-core processors, lots of memory for the compute hosts. So the new hardware, combined with some of the limitations they were seeing in the existing environment, made it seem like a great opportunity to deploy a new OpenStack environment on the new hardware with the specific goal of trying to address some of the limitations in the existing MOC environment. We decided to go ahead with Red Hat's current installer platform. It's called Red Hat OpenStack Platform Director, and that's the last time I will say that because it's a mouthful, and I'm just going to call it Director going forward. That's based on the upstream OOO project. OOO stands for OpenStack on OpenStack. And if you've never heard of it before, it sounds kind of like a crazy idea, but it does work. It uses a small, opinionated, by which I mean kind of mostly pre-configured OpenStack environment called the undercloud to manage your tenant-facing OpenStack environment, which is called the overcloud. There were some obvious advantages to working with Director. It brings reduced manual effort for many of the configuration tasks that we were looking at. For any service that is supported by Red Hat, it's often just a few lines of additional configuration to enable and activate the service. We get a more robust software infrastructure. Director install defaults to highly available controllers, for example. And if there are recommended configuration settings or tuning that needs to happen, that's already in place out of the box as part of the install. And lastly, it is more supportable by Red Hat. So if the MOC has an issue, it needs to raise it up to Red Hat support. Even though the environment is somewhat customized, support staff are going to be familiar with the broad picture of how it looks. So Director has a couple of different provisioning models. And in the typical install, Director handles everything from system discovery, operating system provisioning onto the bare metal hosts, and then software installation and configuration. But there's an alternative model which the MOC was interested in because they wanted to be able to use some of their own provisioning tools that they were already familiar with locally. And that's the split stack model. If you're looking in the Red Hat documentation, you'll see that that's called provisioning, deploying OpenStack onto pre-provisioned servers. And what that means is that you get to use your own tools for doing the basic OS provisioning onto the systems, and then Director is responsible only for the software installation and configuration components of the installs. So with the new hardware and with Director, the MOC has adopted a new infrastructure. We have highly available networking using a brocade switch fabric to help eliminate single points of failure at the network layer. We have highly available controllers to help avoid service outages when controllers fail or when we need to do maintenance. And there are dedicated network hosts that handle tenant outbound traffic to reduce load on the controllers as the MOC grows and is handling more and more network traffic. So currently there are 15 compute nodes dedicated to the OpenStack environment. There are 3 controllers, 2 network hosts, and other 2 Sigma hardware is currently being used for some of the Elastic Bare Metal projects that Oran was mentioning earlier and for other projects going on right now. We're starting internal testing this week and kind of over the next week. We're going to do some limited external testing after that, have people outside the MOC operational staff working on the new environment and try to flesh out as many bugs as possible. And once we are satisfied that things are stable, it'll be available for general use once again, and will replace the existing Kaizen environment. I'm actually done about 3 minutes early, I think.